I want you to listen to Walt Chesley through the lens of the 7F's wheel. I hope someday people can say about me that I am a social entrepreneur, a philanthropist, and a successful executive. One of the reasons I hang out with people like Walt Chesley is because I want that to rub off on me. And it's going to rub off on you today. I had such a fascinating conversation with Walt in getting ready for this conversation. Walt lives in this community. We actually play golf together at the same club. We've done a little business together through the years. But it was a conversation that he had with me about meeting this man in Africa who really changed his life. And when I heard Walt say to me, I needed to stop for reflection, and so I went to visit the motherland. I'd never really heard it put that way from a man who's clearly an African American, and he talked about what it meant to walk the motherland, the earth and the motherland. And that was such a powerful message that I said, you know, Walt, you got to come and speak at our breakfast. So please give Walt Chesley a really warm welcome for our speaker this month, Walt Chesley.
Thank you, Paul.
You're welcome.
Good morning, everyone. And Paul, thank you for that kind introduction and all the great work that you're doing with the Good Leadership Forum. Tremendous work. And Jay, I want to thank you for the great work that you're doing, transforming businesses and driving revenue growth, innovation, and change with the Masters Alliance. And thank you so much for your kind sponsorship of this breakfast this morning. Paul asked me to speak about my background, my journey, where I've come from, what I'm doing now and the future, and he asked me to incorporate the 7Fs into that discussion. I want to start by talking about a recent trip that I had to the motherland, to Ghana. I went there about 6 weeks ago with a contingent of teammates from the YMCA of the Twin Cities. The YMCA of the Twin Cities is a great organization, a Christian organization dedicated to promoting healthy lives, driving social change, and one of the few organizations that I know of that's doing transformational work in Africa. They're doing work not only in Africa, but in Europe. But what riveted me was the work that we're doing in Africa. I've had the opportunity to go to Ghana, to South Africa, and to Liberia. And most recently, I went to Ghana and spent about 2 weeks over there, going through the countryside, the urban areas, spending time in Accra, which is a city of about 4 million people, roughly the size of Oregon. And I went up to Kumasi, the second largest city, and looking at some of the YMCA programs up there. But before we did that, we had an opportunity to spend some time together as a team, and I have the YMCA contingent of group that went with me there. We had the opportunity to sit with a team of individuals that were responsible for the country of Ghana, Accra rather. And the YMCA has a tradition of kicking off all of their meetings with a mission moment. And this particular Tuesday, January 20th, is riveted in my mind because we were sitting around the table embarking on the plans for that 2-week period. In my contingent was Dr. Michael Lovett, who is the superintendent of the White Bear Lake School District, who went there with the purpose of looking at the educational initiatives and how they might be able to provide some insight there both ways. Stephanie Thomas, who is an expert in early childhood learning, was there with me, and Doug Nethercutt, who runs the Camp Menagerie, and an expert in outdoor camping, and helping us think through how we can drive change over there. But the profound moment for me was sitting around that room and that table at that time, and a young man by the name of Abraham Opari Yaboof kicked off the meeting with a scripture. And it was essentially, it implored us to do not be selfish, be humble. Do not look after your own interests solely, but look after the interests of others. Do not be selfish, be humble. Do not solely look after your own interests, but look after the interests of others. And that was powerful to me. It was profound in a sense that there's inherent goodwill in all of us to give and get back. And that provided perspective for me during that 2 weeks there, going through the villages and seeing children with limited resources and inadequate tools, getting educated. But through the YMCA, we're making a difference over there. One of the statistics that struck me was that individuals, they go through elementary school and roughly they have about 70% of their people complete elementary school. Middle school, it dwindles down to about 30 to 35%, and high school, 10%. So huge opportunity to make an impact from the standpoint of the work that we're doing there. Just jumping off, if you will, on the component about humility in that reference that Brother Abraham provided. Humility to me is the absence of pride, not being out in front, not being a drum major instinct, but being behind and being a good servant leader. And to me, that epitomizes goodness that Paul talked about. And as I reflect on my own life, and Paul asked me to speak about my background, I'm the oldest of 10 children. I have a twin brother, and the age separation is about 13 years. I grew up in the projects of Washington, D.C., a 20 by 20 community subdivision in northeast Washington, D.C., with an elementary school to the south, an apartment complex to the west, a power plant to the east, and a highway to the north. And that was my community. But my humble backgrounds, I'm very fortunate to have a father that was committed to his kids and a mother that was nurturing and loving. My father grew up on a farm. He was the fourth oldest of 7 children. My mother grew up on a farm, the fourth oldest of 9 children, sons and daughters of sharecroppers. So very humble beginnings. My father, upon graduation from the Army, he completed school through the 11th grade and completed his high school education in the service. Upon graduating from the service, he worked for the police department in Washington, D.C. He was a mechanic, helping to keep the fleet of cars operational, and he had his own business. He had his own business well back then, and that business was a taxi cab, which supplemented the income for the family to enable my mother to be a homemaker. And one of my early experiences was to be able to work with my father in his business, and that was to keep the car clean, shined, waxed, and so forth. With respect to my upbringing in that neighborhood, it was kind of a rough and tumble neighborhood, not like we have today, where you have firearms and so forth, but it was very nurturing. We had a giving philosophy. My father implored upon us to look out for our neighbors. And on either side of us, we had older citizens. And it was our role to help keep those citizens satisfied from the standpoint of cutting their lawn, shoveling their snow. Yes, there is snow in Washington, D.C. Occasionally. And my father was just a fine, shining example of leadership to our 10 siblings. We grew up in the projects, and around the 7th grade, when I was 13, we had the opportunity my father amassed enough earnings to invest in our first home in southeast Washington, D.C. We moved into that home, and the blessing there was to have access to a facility similar to the YMCA, the Boys Club of the greater Washington, D.C. area. That afforded us an opportunity to do table games, have camping experiences, and engage in recreational sports. And it also afforded me the opportunity to have a great job, one of the best jobs that a 15-year-old could have. What was that job? I was the scorekeeper and recorded and kept the clock for the Washington, D.C. Inter-High League basketball program. Back in those days, there were great coaches at the high school level, people like John Thompson, who was a legendary coach at Georgetown for some 25 years, won an NCAA championship. Morgan Wooten, who coached at DeMatha High School. If you're a basketball fan, you know Morgan Wooten was just legend in that area. Watching these guys deploy strategy at 15 years of age, watching them connect with the student athletes, and emphasis on student athletes, I was able to, at 15 years of age, to follow these students and see them achieve success not only in the classroom, but follow them throughout their selections to go to college. Individuals like James Garvin, who was my teammate, went on to play with the Buffalo Braves. Was a good mentor to me. James Brown, you know James Brown of CBS Acclaim. James went to DeMatha High School and went on to Harvard University. So people like this were really, early role models for me and gave me a sense of the future. What the vision for me was to have good academic standing, be able to go to college, and to be able to better myself. I was blessed to have the ability to do that. And in the course of going through that college experiences, getting good mentoring, good relationships with, with my coaches and so forth. So the points I want to emphasize is that early in my career, good fatherhood, good trusting relationship, a lot of love, and the community around me was very vital to my upbringing and my success. With respect to my current status, I recently left Universal Hospital Services after 10 years. I've been working in corporate America for some 30-some years, and it's been a wonderful, wonderful career. I've learned a lot in helping organizations drive change, work on culture, work on what I view to be the 6 pillars of organizational success, really having a good strategy, having a good leadership team, and the underpinnings of that. People like Paul have helped me over the years to look at talent and look at the business needs of the organization, making sure we have good communications across the enterprise, making sure we have good tools. If people are driving success for their business, if they have inadequate tools in caregiver settings or in the setting that we're in, providing life-saving equipment on patients, they get frustrated and they leave. So making sure we have good tools. And then training. The work that Paul does, the work that Jay does is vital to any organization, and making sure that we have appropriate career pathing and ladders and movement in the organization. And last but not least, rewards and compensation. We're not doing it for philanthropic purposes, but for purposes of keeping our families healthy and vibrant. So that was my formula, and in the technical world of human resources, the Chief Human Resources Officer. But I derived much of my passion, much of my focus from work in the community. Fortunately, I had CEOs and organizations that were very civic-minded, very much like many of you all around here, very civic-minded, giving of your time, talents, and treasures to your community. In the course of working with Ceridian, we had a partnership with the St. Paul school system, specifically St. Paul Central, where we invested in computer labs, we invested in mentoring, and a whole assortment of other initiatives. When I went to Children's Hospitals and Clinics, one of the flagship organizations was Organizations, an organization in Minnesota that's dedicated to eradicating and educating people around chronic diseases. In Minnesota, 1 in 4 Minnesotans has a chronic disease or knows someone with a chronic disease. So very passionate about that. In my haste to get through my upbringing, I failed to talk about my father's battle and illness with Alzheimer's. He died at age 73, relatively young. At 65, we became concerned that he was losing focus, and we had him checked out. Really was brought to our attention in my father's retirement, if you will. He had a concierge business with his cab. He wasn't going out picking up passengers throughout the city, but he had a clientele of elderly citizens in the community that he would take to the shopping centers, take for their medicines, and to church and what have you. So they began to notice that he was confused. He wasn't ripping them off in terms of fares, but he was just confused. And so we had him checked out, and lo and behold, he is one of millions of people that had that chronic disease. I saw a statistic in the Star Tribune that by the year 2050, there will be some 13 million people with some form of dementia, and as difficult as Alzheimer's is, that's the reality with baby boomers. And the costs associated with that one component of care will be about $1 trillion. $1 trillion. That is one of the organizations that we have under the Community Health Charities umbrella that we support. And another one is the Stroke Association, which, interestingly and ironically, my mother passed away 7 years after my father from a stroke. So my passion is derived from helping organizations that affect me personally, and I'm bent on making a difference and a change. The other organization that I'll touch on, and in the interest of time, I got to kind of, rush on here. Paul told me my objective was to be seen, heard, and seated, and then he told me to be brief when I got up here as well. So I'm trying to adopt that. But in the spirit of, trying to get through this, I want to talk about my work in Africa in a little more detail. Not only is the YMCA doing good work, but Paul alluded to a gentleman that I met, ironically, in connection with the YMCA, and his name is Kojo Benjamin Taylor. Kojo is a Ghanaian by birth, was educated in this country, lived here and worked here for about 30 years, contributing to our economy, and he sold his business, and he could have just rested on his laurels, but instead of doing that, he saw work in Africa that needed to be done in his home country. And he worked up at nights tirelessly looking at a business model that would be able to address malaria, which is too prevalent in Africa. Kids are dying needlessly because of a lack of medicine and access to care. Deformed children being born because of lack of prenatal care. Kojo has had the vision to create clinics in Africa where taking the care to the patients in rural communities. 70% of Ghanaians live out in rural communities, but the hospitals in the large cities like Accra and Kumasi. And through sheer determination, will, and passion for what he's been able to do, he's been able to get relationships with individuals around the Twin Cities and around the country to invest in simple clinics that cost about $25,000 to $30,000 to get a 2,500 square foot facility up and running, and having thousands of kids come through those clinics each day. His hub is in Cape Coast, where he has his central laboratory, and he's got some conferencing capabilities to get diagnosis for more acute illnesses back in Cape Coast. But through sheer engagement in the community and having good people connect to good people, he was able to secure almost $30 million in funding recently from Sanford Healthcare. Sanford Healthcare, as you know, is one of the major providers in the Dakotas, South and North Dakota, and they have an interest in helping organizations internationally, to drive healthcare improvement. And so Sanford Healthcare has been a pioneering investor in Africa and making good things happen there. So tremendous results in that sense. I'm sensitive to time, so I'm going to transition to the future. And I guess when I think about the future, I have to, call into your attention the famous refrain of Yogi Berra: "The future ain't what it used to be." And I don't know whether Yogi was intending to be optimistic or pessimistic, when he made that refrain. I'm not a sports, fan to that degree. But Walt Chesley's perspective is to be optimistic and not pessimistic. The future is bright, and I think tomorrow is always, good to be able to see and get up and experience, good people and so forth. So with the future, I think that we have a lot of good work that can get done. I have some specific action plans that I want to get done. One, again, I appreciate this audience. I've been 6 weeks removed from corporate America, and I haven't had a chance to talk to anybody for quite a while outside of my immediate family. But specifically, I have some action plans, and Paul is good about getting action plans. I'm on the board of 3 or 4 organizations, and I feel that there's an opportunity to improve. So I'm a member of the National Association of Corporate Directors. I'm going to learn as much as I can about sustaining organizations and driving good work through good governance practices. Tomorrow, my mother-in-law reaches 80 years of age. I've got my son in town, my granddaughter, and a whole host of relatives in town. So we're going to have a wonderful time celebrating 80 years of living with my grandmother and my family. So that encompasses that component. Fitness, I can use a little bit more of that. I think we all can, but I'm committed, 4 to 6 days out of a week to, earnestly get into the gym and push hard so that I can, be available for my grandkids and to contribute to, society as best I can. I talked about faith, but a scripture I'll leave you with is faith is a substance of, is about hope. And hope is always eternal. And so I hope that you all, will, benefit from what I've talked about, and perhaps there's a glean of a pearl of wisdom or something that I said. And I'll close with Brother Abraham again. As it related to me, it was pretty profound. Do not be selfish. Be humble. Do not solely look after your own interests, but look after the interests of others. And that's so powerful when you digest it. It doesn't say that we shouldn't secure and amass, fortune. We need to work hard. We need to, contribute to society. But do not solely look after the interests of ourselves, but look after the interests of others. And when you're humble, at least when I find it to be the case, you'll get good things to happen. You don't have to be the drum major. You don't have to be, the leader of the parade. People follow people with passion, people with ideals and that stand for something. And I don't want to be preachy because I know all of you are great leaders in our community. I wish you Godspeed and success in all your endeavors, and thank you for having me this morning.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Walt will come up here and we'll do an interview here in just a few minutes, but as part of our custom here, we provide the chance for you to discuss with the people at your table, the round table discussion portion, and I want you to talk about your wheel. I want you to talk about what did you hear from Walt Chesley that relates to the 7F's wheel in your life? Ready, set, go. Kathy made the mistake of bringing up Gophers basketball at our table. So I had to really pull everybody away to get us back to the conversation. But I'll remind you that following the interview portion, Delane will bring out the bucket of goodwill. We'll get to draw a winner, and Kathy will get to do an interview with that winner, and that's really the most joyous part of our day. But while we were talking basketball, tell us a little bit about your basketball experience. Raise your hand if you were a Division I athlete in this room, right? Yeah, there you go. Jim Knutson back there played for the Gophers in hockey, right? So there's two of us in the room. Can you share with us the highlights of your D1 basketball career at Boston University?
Well, thank you. We had some reasonably good teams from a win-loss standpoint, but as much as anything, I think playing Division I sports was an honor and a privilege, and it wasn't a right. So at least at the school I went to, we had to be academically eligible to be able to play. And one of my worst fears, in fact, some evenings I would wake up, some nights rather, wake up in cold sweats. Geez, I did such and such wrong and won't be able to play. True story. But I think that the opportunity to really engage with young men from around the country, from different walks of life, come together and really have a unified presence on the course. We had the opportunity to travel together, room together, and there's a special bonding that takes place when you do that. And many of my teammates still come together to this day. We have a annual golf outing in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, where golfers of all walks and stripes, scratch golfers and golfers like me between 92 and 102, and some guys 6'8" and so forth, really trying to get the game down in 4 hours or less. A bit of a challenge.
See, it always comes back to golf, doesn't
yes.
it? Well, thanks. I want to, as I was listening to your talk through the lens of my 7F's wheel, I heard some powerful themes about family. I'll ask you about that in a minute. But I heard an expression of faith and finances and future around your trips to Africa. So I want to ask you about, you explained to me earlier about how much walking the earth in the motherland, how that really moved you. So I'm interested in having you share a little bit more about that. And then also, please tell us about the microclinic that you and your wife are funding.
Great. Thank you, Paul. I first went to Africa in 2008 and went to Ghana with Kojo Benjamin Taylor, his wife, my wife, and my daughter. And really excited about, and all the travels that I'd had to that point, never going back to Africa. And when I got off the plane, the immigration agent said something that was really powerful to me, and that was, welcome home, brother. Welcome home, brother. And somehow he must have noticed the gleam in my eye and the joy in my eye, and that it was my first occasion to go back there, and that really impacted me in a major way. We had some commercial travel arrangements for us when we left the airport, And about 9:30 at night, there was just this bustling city, people outside the airport in droves. And they were not necessarily vagrants, but they were business people. They were looking to provide a service, carry your bag, sell you a bottle of water. And that was one of the distinct things about traveling through Africa. People are more entrepreneurial than I ever envisioned or expected. They're not necessarily begging or looking for handouts. They're looking to provide a service or some form of to fill a need. So that was one of the components of my time there. And I also, and we, my group of people, my team that went there most recently, from a work standpoint, very strong work ethic. A lot of farming takes place over there. A lot of hunting, to feed themselves and feed their families. So that struck me, and just the sheer willpower of the people to get to work and leave work each day. The transportation systems in Africa are not very strong, so you have to take cabs, you have to take what they call trotros, which are buses that do not leave a particular point until they're full. So you can get to a location at 4 in the morning. If it's not full, you may be on there until 5 o'clock. So it's not reliable, but people take 3 or 4 modes of transportation to get to and from work, and it's just remarkable the passion and the commitment that folks have to earn a living. A sense of spirituality. The YMCA's, when I was there, we went on a Sunday morning to check in on one of the facilities, and one of the services they provide is an opportunity for faith-based organizations to have their Sunday services and their Sunday school services in the YMCA. So those were some of the insights, Paul, that I gathered, that touched the 7 Fs, tremendous work ethic, people that are content, highly spiritual. In fact, the commercial establishments, the cabs, the businesses, they have scripture emblazoned on their vehicles. Praise be to God, cab service. Glory be to God, beauty salons. A high sense of a ecumenical presence and religiosity that exists over there.
Excellent. Thank you. 10 kids.
Oh.
Wow.
I get tired of thinking about it.
Yeah. So you told us that you have family in town now. What traditions have you carried over from a family with 10 kids to what you're doing now in your life?
I have 6 brothers and 3 sisters. The 6 brothers played Division I football. I was the only one in my right mind that played basketball. So they weren't as talented as me, but they had a passion for basketball, and we'd get out, and I tell you, there'd be bruises and cuts on the opponent. No one wanted to go up against the Chesley guys, not necessarily because of talent, but because of brute, strength and so forth. But growing up, was really a sense of, being the oldest, trying to set an example so that the others could, learn and benefit from. And with 13 years separated from oldest to youngest, it's essentially 4 families. I was 18 and going off to college when my youngest brother was 5 years of age. I graduated when he was 9 years of age, and so he couldn't hang out with me, and we had no bonds or anything like that, but we're very close. When I was home about 10 days ago, I was able to spend time with my family, bonding, watching basketball games, shooting pool, just having a sense of, familiar presence. And the good thing about it, as I reflect on this, is that my son was in our presence. And, he's 30 years of age and, just wants to hang out. He has his own contemporaries. When I was 30, I didn't want to hang out necessarily with my uncles, but all the time.
Yeah.
But he really, I think he expressed it's a very enriching experience to be around family. One of the traditions that we had, and we carry on to this day, is my mother, having a large family, really amassed some great cooking skills. She could put together, a meal in 2 minutes. And when I talk to my wife about that, I'm in a doghouse. Mom did this and so forth. So don't do that. But my mother, had an instinct for, each of her siblings, needs. If I came in from out of town, she had a customized meal. You know, she knew I liked cornbread. That was one of the things that was always a staple that she had around, and would see that there was a dish, you know, for me when I got there. But the family was a hub, not only for our immediate family in that respect, but anybody in the neighborhood. Kids, you know, could come over on a Sunday and have, you know, a meal with the family, and you know, my father would be there, and it was one of the days that he tried to make a point to be around the family, you know, with his 2 jobs. And when I went off to college, one of the hallmarks of going back to Washington, D.C., we would come down and play Georgetown, the University of Maryland, GW, you know, one of the local teams. And my mother fed 15 college basketball players, coaches, and assistants. You know, once we got to town, we wanted to go to Mama Chesley's house and
awesome.
have a meal. So you know, that was one of the things that you know, stand out. And to that extent, you know, it's a tradition to the family to this day. You know, we celebrate the key holidays together. One of my siblings will host you know, the family meal and come together as a family.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time with us and your
My pleasure.
generosity.
Thank you.
Okay, now.